बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम, अस्सलाम वालेकुम। आप देख रहे हैं व्यूज मैटर। मैं हूं मुर्तज़ा डार। दोस्तों, आज आपकी हम मुलाकात करा रहे हैं। एक इंटरव्यू हमने कंडक्ट किया है। हमारे साथ मोहम्मद कासिम मौजूद हैं। ये एक सीनियर जर्नलिस्ट हैं और मौजूद हैं इस वक्त यरूशलेम के अंदर, ईस्ट यरूशलेम के अंदर ये मौजूद है। एक फ़लस्तीनी है और एक लंबे अरसे से यहाँ पर रह रहे हैं और जंग जारी है, इसको भी इन्होंने कवर किया है। जब 7 तारीख को वहाँ पर मौजूद थे, बॉर्डर पर भी गए और वहाँ पे जाके भी इन्होंने इस सारी जंग को, लड़ाई को कवर किया है। अपने न्यूज़ रूम, वॉर रूम आप कह लें, जो भी उसके अंदर ये मौजूद है। हमें इन्होंने बहुत मुश्किल सबक दिया है और मीडिया इनको वेलकम करेंगे। अब चूँकि वो उर्दू नहीं जानते, उनसे बातचीत हम अंग्रेज़ी ज़ुबान के अंदर करेंगे। तो जो लोग हमारे साथी अंग्रेज़ी समझ सकते हैं, वो ज़ाहिर है उनके लिए रेलेवेंट इंटरव्यू है, वरना जो नहीं समझ सकते, ज़ाहिर है उनके लिए कोई हल निकालने की हम कोशिश करेंगे। So, Mr. Muhammad, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us. Everywhere around the world, everyone is worried about the situation which is right now. So, you being there, sitting in East occupied Jerusalem, and being a journalist that you covered the latest situation is happening and has happened in the past few days. What do you let our audiences know, starting from when this attack happened on 7th October? What was the situation? What you have witnessed? And what is the situation on ground right now? What's going on there in Gaza, in Tel Aviv, in Israel?
Well, thank you for having me. This whole thing began on October 7th when Hamas infiltrated Israel and attacked some of the towns near the borders with the Gaza Strip. That was somewhat of a shocking attack that I would go as far as to say that nobody had expected such an attack to be carried out by Hamas. But that was one of the reasons why Hamas was able to carry out its attack in that fashion, because they chose the timing during a Jewish holiday on a Saturday, and at a time um, when hardly anybody expected such a surprise attack take place. The early hours of October 7th were chaotic. News were trickling in, a lot of news coming in. Many were trying. We were trying to sift through what's news and what's not, what's really happening on the ground, the extent of this attack, the response from the Israeli army and the Israeli government. But within the first few hours, the situation started to clear up, and we understood that um, the scope and the extent of Hamas's attack. And we, as journalists, we started to head towards the south to find out what was going on, and we did get close as much as we could as journalists. Um, Within, like I said, within hours, Israel started to retaliate. Obviously, Hamas was able to capture a number of people. Some are Israeli soldiers, part of the military, and others were civilians. And those are the what everybody referred to as hostages, or captured by the Hamas and other Palestinian factions. And since then, it's almost a month to the day now, and Israel has launched a massive, brutal military attack on the Gaza Strip. Keep in mind that the Gaza Strip is a small territory. It's an open air prison, as many refer to. It's besieged. It's under Israeli blockade for the last 17 years. So hardly anything gets into Gaza or gets out of Gaza without Israel's approval. We must make this point clear. And Israel started its airstrike campaign, intense, violent, indiscriminate at times. We've seen images coming out of the Gaza Strip where schools, UNRWA's facilities, hospitals have been targeted one after another. in Israel's response, and many Palestinians refer to it as a revenge response more so than an actual military response that takes into consideration war ethics and war rules and the at least the minimum attempt by any army to try to protect the civilians. Now, Israel, for its part, uses the excuse that Hamas members and other Palestinian faction fighters hide or mingle with the civilians. But nevertheless, this is something that, looking at the sheer number of casualties, the vast majorities are children. So far, out of the near 10,000 people killed in this war on Gaza, almost 4,000 of those are children. Another 2,000 are women. Israel used relentless airstrikes on many parts of the Gaza Strip, also artillery shelling, almost 24/7 until now. And then in the last week or so, they've launched their offensive invasion of the Gaza Strip. It's still limited. It's still, moving very slowly. Israel has also encountered fears.
I want to bring you to this point that can you help us enlighten our viewers understand that what is the war situation or the battle situation right now on the ground? Like people would actually want to know that Israelis have entered Gaza to what extent? I mean, 1 kilometer to 5, 10. I mean, how long they have reached inside and what kind of resistance they are facing right now from Hamas. And the underground tunnels we have heard is playing a lot important role. So how would you define the war situation right now, the battle situation?
It's a fierce battle right now inside parts of the Gaza Strip. Mainly, Israel is has basically infiltrated or crossed into the Gaza Strip. It's an invasion. Parts of the Gaza Strip in the north and northwestern part, those are mainly farm area. So it was rather easy for the Israeli tanks, infantry, and ground troops to move into this area. Some say it's only a few kilometers, and some of the towns like Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, and others in the north part of the Gaza Strip are already deserted towns. We know that there are gun battles take place there throughout the day between the Israeli forces and Hamas members, and those are described as fierce battle, face-to-face gunfight, guerrilla style urban warfare in this area. Israel has encircled Gaza City. It's a main, it's referred to as the Hamas stronghold, and that's where a Shifa hospital is located also, among others. And still haven't been able to penetrate the city. Israel hasn't been able to break Hamas's defenses of the city. The city is still populated. Not everyone in the northern part of Gaza listen to the Israeli army demand by evacuating the north to the south, because when they did that at the beginning, they were targeted also in the south. So people started to think that there's no place safe in Gaza anyhow. So there was no reason for them to move south if they're going to be killed there too. So they'd rather be in their homes in the north of Gaza and hope to be safe rather than just be evacuated. It's important to say that Israel, almost from the get-go, stopped water from going in. There's no fuel allowed to go in, no electricity, no food. Even the so-called humanitarian convoys that get in through the Rafah crossing from Egypt. We're talking about 20 shipments a day, 20 trucks per day to get in, while in the past, Hamas used to receive some 500 trucks per day.
Yes.
There are more than 2.3 million people living there, and 20 trucks don't really do it for them. So the battle is
Okay.
fierce. Israeli army recognizes that they're encountering fierce resistance, and they have sustained casualties. I think the last number we saw before we got on air, about 29 Israeli soldiers have been killed just in the last week. And since October 7, the number of Israeli military casualties reached about 345 killed, and hundreds also wounded. So this shows you the intensity of the fight. We have seen footage coming out from from videos that Hamas provided to journalists through its Al Qassam brigades. That's the armed wing of the Hamas group. Of them targeting tanks, bulldozers, and engaged in gun battles with Israeli soldiers. So the situation is still extremely dangerous. The war is underway, and Israel has its forces on the ground inside Gaza. They haven't been able to reoccupy or to retake the Gaza Strip completely, but they're working on it, and they're working on cutting off certain parts of the Gaza Strip to stop or block Hamas's ability to move from one part, from the south to the north, and vice versa, and also stop any any of their members to move, to provide support or so forth. So yes, the war is undergoing, and even by the admission of the Israeli military, it's extremely tough. And Israel has said that this campaign may take some time, and they acknowledge that it will be costly too.
Yes, they're mentioning this, that it is costing us around $2 billion per day. So now the question is, I was reading some of the articles and some of the war experts' opinion, and they were saying that, okay, Israel is fighting right now on one front with Hamas, and on the other front, it is fighting a rough battle with Hezbollah on the Lebanon border. And on the third side, they have problem with the Houthis. So they're bombing them as well. They're targeting them as well. And fourth front is inside Israel, where they don't know what is happening, what kind of intelligence-based operations might have happened or is going to happen. So what one of the biggest targets Israel has achieved so far? I mean, what gains, what military gains that they have achieved? So do you have any idea, being covering this everything, that what big military gains that they've achieved fighting this all?
Well, I'm not a military expert, but I can tell you that so far there haven't been that much or that many achievements reached by the Israeli military. We're talking about 10,000, almost 10,000 civilians. By the time this interview is aired, we'll probably surpass the 10,000 casualties. And like I said, when you have almost 40% of those are children, and if you add women to it, we're almost 50% of those are children and women. And if you add the elderly to that number even grows to 70% of those casualties are children, women, and the elderly. In terms of achievement, Israel hasn't been able to crush Hamas. That was their objective from the beginning. They set the bar high. They said that by the end of this military campaign, Hamas will cease to exist in the Gaza Strip, and there will be no one part of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So in terms of achievement, if we look at the first one, there is no achievement there. Hamas still fighting. They're utilizing their tunnels very efficiently. Yes, Israel claims that it has been able to find out about some of the tunnel system underneath Gaza, but Hamas has one of the most complicated, most complex, most sophisticated web of tunnels under. It's a whole new city beneath Gaza. So that's another no achievement there. Israel at the beginning was able to garner international sympathy and support. That turned around after a week or two when the casualties among Palestinians in the Gaza Strip started to pile, and the numbers started to rapidly increase. And like I said, when you have images of children, dead bodies of those killed, when you have images coming out of ambulances targeted and hospitals and so forth, the international public opinion has shifted, and that's even affecting the the official or governments in whether in the West or in the U.S. So if Israel has the upper hand militarily, and they are engaged from the sea, from the air, and from the ground with Hamas fighters and inside the Gaza Strip. It's too early to say that Israel is winning or Hamas is losing. I think we are still in the kind of early stages of this bloody war, and it will go on for quite some time. It's not going to be over anytime soon, not this week, and probably not even next week. And we'll see what's going to happen in the foreseeable future. I think the pressure now is in the United States. It's on the Europeans to try to exert pressure on the Israeli government to accept some sort of a truce or ceasefire, to allow for humanitarian aid to get in, and also allow for fuel to get in, so that the health ministry, the Gaza health ministry, will be able to operate its hospitals. And keep in mind, there was about 35 hospitals in the Gaza Strip before this war started, and now less than just a handful of them are still in service, and those that are still in service don't have fuel to operate their facilities. Doctors aren't able to perform operations, and they don't have the space. They're overwhelmed, and the health sector in Gaza is, I know it's a cliche. We keep saying that it's on the verge of collapse. I think it's already collapsed, and I don't know how they operate. I think because they have no other choice. Very few wounded Palestinians, the most critically wounded ones, are allowed to leave to Egypt, and that started just a few days ago. And we're talking about dozens that, probably so far until today, less than 100 or 150 of them have been able to cross from Gaza into Egypt. On Friday, a convoy of ambulances was targeted by Israeli war jets, and 2 ambulances were struck, and people were killed by this airstrike. That this convoy, actually, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza, obtained approval, and were in touch with the International Red Cross, letting them know who they are, where they are, and where they're headed. And they were actually leaving from the north, Shifa Hospital, from North Gaza to the south, headed to the Rafah crossing, and they were targeted. So it's a catastrophe. It's a humanitarian catastrophe in the making in Gaza, and the sheer number of casualties is just beyond anyone's imagination. If we compare it to the to an active war scene now in Ukraine, it's nothing like it.
I mean, you have covered some of the really rough and rugged events happening around the globe. I know you've been traveling a lot as well. The world has recently witnessed one of the biggest fight in Ukraine, like you've mentioned, the Russian invasion and all of that. But still, we have seen that the war crimes committed there were not of, the mammoth. We see things happening here, and the world is largely silent, especially the Western Bloc, the same bloc who used to talk a lot about the humanitarian crisis they're happening in Ukraine. Why? I mean, why it is like this?
Listen, I think this current war, this current war exposed the West yet again. This is the West that, whether in the U.S. or in Europe, that pride itself on human rights and being the beacon of freedom and the one protecting the civil liberties of people. All this was exposed. The world reacted to the Russian invasion of Ukraine almost completely the opposite. There are sane officials And I'll name John Kirby as one, and I'll name European Union officials who shed tears on Ukrainian children, and rightfully so, on the Ukrainian civilians, and rightfully so, who criticized Russian President Vladimir Putin for him cutting off fuel, water, electricity, food on Ukrainians. Yet they reacted the opposite when it came to the Palestinians.
Why?
And that's why a lot of people accuse them of double standard. One thing I just want to mention, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists that there will be no fuel going in unless Hamas releases all 240 captured Israelis from their control, and then he will allow for fuel to go in. Obviously, Hamas only agreed to allow the civilians or foreigners, dual citizens, to be released. But the U.S. position has been I'd like to be careful in choosing my words, but it's really sad to see that the United States, who tries to lecture the world on human rights and tries to lecture governments on how to behave and how to conduct wars, and then they come here and they give unconditional, unequivocal support for Israel, and then they refuse to pressure Israel to accept a ceasefire. We're talking about a humanitarian ceasefire. You can't get yourself to continue to watch all these images coming out of Gaza and wonder, why would the US do this? Why would the European Union and Britain agree with Israel's position on not allowing a ceasefire to take place? And this is for humanitarian reasons. Obviously, the West says that the ceasefire would benefit, it's advantageous to Hamas, it's going to benefit Hamas and so forth, it's going to help reorganize. I care more about the civilians. And we look at the children who have pretty much lost everything, and they're, they have nobody now to turn to. And I think that this is the least that the US and Europe and the international community can do, is try to bring a calm ceasefire to the Gaza Strip for now, and then you can talk about everything else. But again, the West has exposed themselves at the United Nations Security Council. Every resolution was vetoed because of words, whether there should be the word terrorism or terrorist included in one resolution draft resolution, or another word is lifted, while people are killed by the hundreds each day. And people are wondering how many more Palestinians should be killed before it satisfies Israel, and Israel thinks that it's gotten what it needs, or before the international community starts to move in the direction of maybe exerting pressure on Israel and its government and bring about a humanitarian ceasefire. Another thing I'd like to talk to you about, if you allow me just a minute here,
please.
that the Palestinian issue has been forgotten or pushed to the back burner for a while, and hardly anybody speaks of the Palestinian cause and the misery that Palestinians go through. And we tend to forget that there is an occupation still exists. This is the longest military occupation that still exists in the world, and only when something like this happened that we start to hear a softer language from the US, from the White House, and from European, and they start to talk about how important it is to provide a political horizon for the Palestinians and to provide the Palestinians with the state of their own, and they start to talk about a two-state solution. They could have done that before.
Yes.
They could have done that years ago. But
yes.
I'm sitting here, and I guarantee you, once this war is over, nothing's going to happen about.
Nothing's going to happen.
Nothing's going to happen. I'm old enough to remember that this language was used several times in the past,
Yes.
and nothing happens.
Yes. Okay. So can you help us understand what is the sentiment of people there in Israel right now? I mean, I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are not, of the view that the war should continue. So people in Tel Aviv, in East Yerushalayim, in other parts of the country, what is their larger understanding of whatever is happening right now in and
Okay,
because the question, because they're also under threat.
Israelis seem to be uh, dissatisfied with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'm not so sure that they are against the war. They're against Netanyahu because he hasn't. They don't trust him anymore. They believe that he has let them down. That there were security and intelligence lapses on October 7, and they hold him responsible for what happened. Also, the relatives of those captured by Hamas are holding
Yes.
almost daily demonstrations, applying more pressure on the prime minister. A recent poll came out where 76% of the Israeli public hold Mr. Netanyahu responsible for what took place on October 7. 49% wants him to resign after the war is over. 29% of Israelis want him to resign now. That's just an unbelievable number. So Israelis are not against the war, and they're not sympathetic with the Palestinians. Let's just, the vast majority of them, they're not. But they're not happy with their own leadership. And many accuse Netanyahu of trying to prolong his political career, and that the war, the longer the war takes, the longer he stays in power. As far as Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem, Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, obviously they're definitely against the war. Israel has been cracking down on Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem and occupied West Bank. There have been daily incursions. Israel has arrested more than 2,000 Palestinians in the last 30 days. Almost 150 Palestinians have been killed in the last since October 7th. And this year is going to be probably the bloodiest in decades by the time it ends. Israel is trying to contain the West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem, trying to make sure that it does not explode out of control and it doesn't become another front for it. You mentioned the Houthis, which have fired several ballistic missiles, which were intercepted at Israel, as well as drones. So that risks that adds the risk of having not only another front, but having a regional war take place. We know that Hezbollah and Israel are engaged in I wouldn't call them skirmishes. It's a limited war in the northern part of between Israel and Lebanon that could explode any minute into becoming a major war and another front for Israel, which the U.S. doesn't want to see. The U.S. wants to make sure that no other fronts are open, so Israel could focus on its war in Gaza. Let's not forget that other groups in Iraq and Syria have targeted U.S. military bases for U.S. position on the war, which again risks that we may have regional war. But also Arab countries in the region like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. Those are countries that have, especially Jordan and Egypt, they've seen demonstrations take place in the streets in support of the Palestinians. And this could risk also destabilizing these countries, mainly Jordan. And the U.S. is highly, concerned about the stability of its allies in the region, whether in the Gulf or Egypt and Jordan. So this could go out of control. I mean, the longer this war continues, the longer the Israeli onslaught on Gaza continues to take place, then the risks or chances of having a wider conflict increases. So putting all these elements together explains maybe also why U.S. Secretary of State continues to come back to the region and tries to find a way out. But unfortunately, he has failed even in his last trip.
Yes.
Today he was in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Yesterday he was in Amman, Jordan. And on Friday he met with Israeli Prime Minister in Tel Aviv, and he wasn't able to achieve anything. And everyone
Right.
seems to be steadfast in their position.
That's pretty clear, pretty evident. And they're not getting what they are expecting. Now, the question is that on the other side, there was some of the expectations from Iran and some of the expectations from Hezbollah. We all were looking at the address of Hassan Nasrallah on Friday, which he did. Some of the people are of the view that that address was not something which they were expecting. I mean, they were expecting that he's going to announce, a full-scale war attack or something, something aggressive, one step ahead than what they're doing right now. So I want you to analyze that what his address was all about and what is the role of Iran you see in this all. I mean, we understand that West claims that Iran is running its all proxies. Either it's Hamas, it's Hezbollah, it's Houthis, whatever. How do you see that their legit or their official role in this all?
Listen, every country in the world tries to have its satellites, have its proxies, have its allies. The U.S. have its allies in the Middle East, and Iran wants to be a regional or even a international, global power, and that's why it keeps building its military arsenal. The same goes for Israel, Turkey. Every country wants to become a global power, and part of becoming a global power or a regional power and protect your interest is making sure you support groups. And I'm explaining what Iran is doing. And Iran has proxies or groups that it allies with it in Lebanon, vis-a-vis Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and we know that there are also Iranian presence in Syria, as well as groups that are backed by Iran in Iraq and Yemen. So it's not a secret. Some of those groups operate independently, and others, they rely heavily on Iran and they take direction from it. So Iran doesn't also deny the fact that it supports Hamas and the Palestinian people. It's clear, they admit to it from publicly. Whether Iran has anything to do with with the October 7 attack, even the Americans said that there were no evidence that Iran was involved, but they don't deny that Iran supports Hamas. Israel said the same thing. Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, those groups are part of what is called axis of resistance, and they support each other. Iran, the Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah on Friday, when he gave his speech, which was closely watched by pretty much everyone, it was a long speech. He dissected the situation from day one until now. There were many hidden messages in this speech. That a message to the U.S. that if you attack us, we'll respond. A message to Israel the same way. But people wanted Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah to go out and publicly declare war, not realizing that war already exists. There is a war of attrition between Hezbollah and Israel in the north. The number of Hezbollah members killed so far until today, almost 60. So we have daily artillery shellings and attacks on both sides. So there is the north is an active scene. How big of a scene it is militarily, it's still somewhat contained, somewhat limited, and all parties seem to be okay with it if it continues to be limited that way. But Hezbollah also needs to take into account that it's not the it's not the government in Lebanon, and not all Lebanese agree with Hezbollah if it declares war on Israel without pretext, without a reason. If it attacks now and there's no clear evidence that it was attacking to protect itself, for example, or as a retaliation, then it loses the Lebanese support, domestic support. And that's extremely important to Hezbollah, especially if given what happened in 2006. But yes, the situation in the north Um, we have an active front. It's not a full-fledged military scene, but it's an active front, and people wanted to hear Hezbollah come out, and rather than explain what happened and expectations and drawing red lines and so forth, and if this happens, then we'll act this way, and if this happens, we will respond this way. They want him to come out and just say, we declare war and we are bombing Israel. That did not take place. And obviously, being in that position isn't easy. And again, he has to take into consideration the ramification on Hezbollah domestically if a step like this is taking place. But again, I must say that we do have an active scene in the north, and there is a war taking place. It's not in the same intensity and bloody uh, that we see in Gaza, but it's taking place in the north. It's contained to the southern part of Lebanon, to the northern part of Israel, along the lines, along the border lines. But Israel evacuated hundreds of thousands of people from the north too, because expectations are that war could erupt any moment. Um, yeah, and having said all that, that's why the U.S. That's how it explains things. Sent its military hardware to the Mediterranean, whether it's the USS Gerald Ford or Eisenhower to the Eastern Mediterranean, sent a few hundreds of its troops to the region, trying to to reinforce its presence here in the region. That if war breaks and Iran even gets into the act, that they're able to retaliate too and protect Israel too.
Okay, last question, Mohammed. Uh, what is your observation there on the ground since you are in East Jerusalem? Uh, what do you see in coming few days? I mean, do you see any stop to this war, this madness, or you see that no, there's no stoppage right now? I don't see that. This will linger on for a few weeks or maybe months. What is your analysis on this?
Um, I don't think that we're going to see an end this week. The week is beginning, and I don't think that there will be a law or a ceasefire um, that is worth implementing this week. I think the situation will continue to be the same until the end of this week, and we'll see what's going to happen after that. Things are developing and developing by the hour. Where you have um, casualties mounting hour by bloody hour, and I'm not so sure how long uh, will it take before the world reacts and say enough is enough. A lot of people, including myself, are wondering what's the number that would satisfy Israel and the international community, whether it's Europe or America, before they say, yeah, it's enough Palestinians killed, and we can stop now. I'm not sure if this so-called collateral damage is worth it to bomb a building because you suspect that a Hamas member is hiding in there, and because of it, you kill hundreds of Palestinians, hundreds of innocent civilians. I'm not so sure that even though you don't have evidence that you can bomb a hospital just because you claim that there is a control room underneath it. Meanwhile, you have thousands of people sheltered in those hospitals, those displaced people who sought refuge because they have nowhere else to go. Um, that's the big question. The conscience of the international community must wake up, and must and the White House and Brussels, um, you know, European Union
Yes.
must act, and the Americans must act. And I have to say one more thing. As a
Please.
journalist, I am extremely disappointed of how Western media uh, are portraying what's taking place. I remember in 2003 when the U.S. media failed to challenge uh, former President George W. Bush with his assertions and um, decision to invade Iraq, and we all know what happened after that.
Yes.
Then many media outlets came out years later apologizing and acknowledging, recognizing the mistake that they made. And one would think that they have learned their lesson. No, they didn't. The same thing happened again. We have learned that we journalists are the defenders of the weak, the truth, that we stand up for the disfranchised, and that we have to cover the news and not be involved in the news and not be and not allow self censorship and allow pressure on us so we won't upset one side over the other. That didn't happen. And I've covered
Correct.
news from many parts of the world, and I must tell you that I am extremely disappointed. It's shameful what the major international news media outlets uh, way of covering this war. It is just pathetic, to be quite honest with you. And I say this without being emotional and without any emotions. I'm just calling it as it is. We are seeing it on the ground. We cover the. I just want to say one quick example. I was in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank a couple of weeks ago, covering a protest, and there were not even a dozen people yet there, and a couple of kids come in with a piece of paper, um, small, it has an Israeli flag drawn on it,
Mm.
and an American news crew was next to us, all
Mm.
dressed up in shields and the hats and the whole yard, 9 yards. I mean everything, and we were just wondering. We're in the middle of Ramallah. There is nothing dangerous here, but anyhow. So these two kids, they lit the piece of paper or the Israeli flag on fire, and they jump on it with the camera and the close-ups and all these things, and that's sensationalism.
Yes.
And this is just a minor example, and we've seen example of reporters on the border with Gaza in the south acting up as if rockets are falling on top of us. And yeah, we've had those events, but there is no reason to act. You're not the news. As a journalist, you don't want to be part of the news. As a journalist, you want to be as far away in terms of being the news and report on what's taking place as accurate, as objective, as independent as possible. That didn't
Yes.
happen here. And
Yes, you're right.
to many Europeans and Americans, Palestinian casualties don't exist. To many Europeans and to many Americans, they just have one thing that they need to go after, and we all know what that is. They question you know Palestinians and Arabs very tough. They have tough questions when they host Palestinian guests or analysts, but they don't do the same when it's the other side, and that's really disappointing. That's really disappointing, and I pride myself of being an American journalist. I was trained in the U.S. I
But you
got
know,
my
Mohammed, a
education
lot of
in the
people
U.S.
ask this
But
question that,
that's
okay, a lot of
sad
people
to me.
ask this question, Mohammed, that you are talking about the role of Western media, also the Western government, but they blame Muslims as well. I mean, they said why and what we should expect from the Westerns when we see the role of the rest of the Muslim countries, their media, and they're inclined towards whatever is happening with their Muslim brothers, or forget Muslim brothers, I mean humans. So, in last few seconds, if you could sum up with the role of the Muslims towards this all. I mean, you blame Westerns, I understand,
Well,
but why blame them when the Muslims are, you're not on your side or on your support?
well, listen. I always try to differentiate between the street and the official position. I think the Arabs and Muslims at large are sympathetic to the Palestinians and to the just cause of the Palestinians. We see this in massive demonstrations in different Muslim countries, in Pakistan, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Turkey, in Iran. So when it comes to the street, we know what to expect. But again, I think the majority of Arab and Muslim countries, they're they have special relationship with the U.S. And many of those governments are more interested in staying in power serving their people and standing up to injustice and standing up to its people. And that's not happening. So I always try to differentiate between what the street feels and what the official position is. I mean, look at the US. Yesterday, we've seen massive protests take place in Washington. It didn't only include Arab Americans or Muslim Americans, it also included Americans. And, we're all Americans. But if you want to start, categorizing people, that's fine. But when people believe in a just cause, they go out. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, Muslim, Jew, or Christian. People will go out and support the just cause. And that was the expectations from the Palestinians, that the same position that the US and Europe took in Ukraine, they thought that they would take when it comes to the Palestinians, and that didn't happen. And again, I'll end with what I started with, that the war on Gaza exposed the West, exposed the US. And again, we think that people or governments learn from their lesson, and they try to kind of work to change their image. The position of the US and the West and others just gave credence to what people believe those countries stand for. Their interests are far more important than standing up to the truth and to justice and to the virtues that they try to lecture the world about.
All right. Thank you so much, Mohammed. We all wish that peace come, in place as soon as this is possible. We all pray for that. And I also pray for your safety and your family's safety there, since you are there in one of the worst places right now where there's war on lots of sides. So we'll keep on bothering you. And for now, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
जी नाज़रीन, तो हमारे साथ मौजूद थे मोहम्मद अल कासिम, सीनियर जर्नलिस्ट हैं और इस वक्त ईस्ट ऑक्यूपाइड यरूशलेम के अंदर ये मौजूद थे और इन्होंने हमारे लिए वक्त निकाला। इनका हमें ज़रा बहुत शुक्रिया अदा किया और बहुत सारी इन्होंने ज़बरदस्त बातें की। जब 7 तारीख को हमला हुआ तो उस हमले के बाद क्या कुछ हुआ, वो सारे सेशन का हिस्सा था, उन्होंने जिसका जिक्र किया, और उसके बाद से लेकर अब तक की ग्राउंड सिचुएशन क्या है, मिलिट्री सिचुएशन क्या है, इस सब का भी उन्होंने जो है वो काफ़ी डिटेल के अंदर जो है वो जिक्र किया। सो हम कोशिश करेंगे कि आने वाले दिनों में भी आपको इस जंग के हवाले से जो है, इसमें होने वाले डेवलपमेंट्स के हवाले से यूं ही आगाह रखें। अब तक के लिए इतना ही, अपना ख्याल रखिए। अल्लाह।